Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah.
And today we're
Excited for this one.
diving into the
Yes.
world of Karen Horney.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for some of you who may not be familiar with her work,
Right.
she was a psychoanalyst who really offered kind of a unique perspective on neurosis.
Mm-hmm.
And we're specifically going to be focusing on her book, Our Inner Conflicts.
Yes.
And in this book, she kind of goes against some of the more traditional Freudian thinking.
Right.
So I'm curious,
Since-
maybe you could help set the stage a little bit for us
Yeah.
and talk about, what was she really interested in?
Well,
What were some of her key ideas?
yeah, she was really fascinated by the idea that our early relationships, especially those in childhood,
Mhm.
really impact our personalities and even lead to
Right.
what she called these basic conflicts within us.
So this idea of basic conflicts,
Yeah.
it seems like a pretty core
That-
concept in her work.
Mhm.
Could you unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure.
What exactly did she mean by this?
Well, she believed that these conflicts, they arise from a child's need to cope with a world that often feels hostile
Mm-hmm.
and overwhelming and anxiety-inducing.
Yeah.
As kids, we're completely dependent on others for our safety and security.
Right.
But what happens if those early relationships are disrupted?
Right.
If a child experiences neglect or rejection or even just a lack of consistent affection,
Mm-hmm.
it can create these deep-seated anxieties.
So it sounds like it's not just about our instincts that we're
Right.
born with, but it's also about how we adapt
Yeah.
to our environment, and especially to those early social interactions.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about adaptation. It's about how we learn to navigate the world,
Mm-hmm.
especially our social world, from a very young age.
So as we try to kind of cope with these anxieties
Mhm.
and navigate these relationships,
Mhm.
how do those conflicts that you mentioned earlier, how
Sure.
do those actually kind of play out?
What are some of the ways?
They identified three main directions
Okay.
that a child might move in to try and manage this basic conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So we have moving toward people,
Okay.
moving against people,
Got it.
and then moving away from people.
Okay. So those are the three.
Exactly.
That's helpful.
And it's important to note that these aren't personality types,
Right.
and none of them are inherently good or bad.
Mm.
We all need elements of all three of these to
Mhm.
navigate the world effectively.
Right.
It's when one of these strategies becomes rigid
Okay.
and extreme that it leads to problems.
So it's about balance.
It is.
It's about flexibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, can you give us like a concrete example of what moving toward people might look like?
Sure. So let's say you have a friend who's always trying to please everyone.
Mm-hmm.
They might be overly agreeable,
Right.
struggling to say no,
Okay.
constantly seeking approval from others.
Yeah. I know a few people like that. Right. Well, this could be a sign that they've developed an intense need for affection and acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps because they felt insecure or unloved
Okay.
in their early relationships.
So they're overcompensating in a way.
In a way, yeah. They're trying to manage that anxiety
Right.
by ensuring they're surrounded by love and support,
Makes sense.
even at the expense of their own needs and boundaries.
So even though that need for connection is natural,
Yes,
it can become kind of a problem
absolutely.
if it's not balanced.
Exactly. When it leads to overcompliance
Right.
and a fear of asserting oneself.
Okay, so we got moving toward.
Mhm.
What about moving against?
Good question.
How does that one play out?
Yeah, so imagine someone who thrives on competition,
Okay.
who needs to win at all costs.
Mhm.
They might be aggressive or manipulative,
Right.
even exploitative
Okay.
in their relationships.
So this is someone who's really kind of trying to dominate
Yeah.
their surroundings.
Yeah, they might have experienced early feelings of helplessness or powerlessness.
Okay.
And so they're trying to overcompensate for that
Got it.
by being in control.
So it's like a defense mechanism
It is.
against feeling vulnerable.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And of course, this can lead to a lot of conflict
Right.
in their relationships.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got moving toward. We've got moving against.
Mhm.
Now, what about the third direction, moving away?
Yeah, this one's interesting.
What does that look like?
So think about someone who really values their independence,
Okay.
who avoids emotional intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
keeps everyone at arm's length.
Yeah.
They might appear self-sufficient,
Right.
detached,
Okay.
but underneath, there's often a deep fear of being hurt or overwhelmed by others.
So they're protecting themselves
Exactly.
by creating distance,
Mm-hmm.
by kind of minimizing the risk of getting hurt.
That's it.
Got it.
Especially if they've experienced, betrayal or rejection in the past.
Right.
So this can be a very effective defense mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also lead to isolation and loneliness,
Right.
even if they don't consciously recognize that yearning for connection.
Yeah. It's interesting how these early experiences can lead to these
It is.
kind of complex and often contradictory patterns in our lives.
Yeah, that's exactly what Horney was trying to eliminate.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us to her concept of what she called protective structures,
Okay.
which are essentially the defenses we build
Mm-hmm.
to cope with these unresolved basic conflicts.
So we've got these conflicts simmering inside of us.
Yes.
And then we develop these protective structures
Right.
as a way to manage them,
To manage the anxiety.
the anxiety.
Yes.
So what are some of the ways that these structures actually manifest?
Well, one of the key defenses that she identified is the creation of an idealized image.
Now, I've always heard that it's important to have a positive self-image.
Right.
So how is this idealized image
Good question.
different? Well,
Yeah, it's different. In a healthy sense, having a positive self-image means you recognize your strengths and you accept your imperfections.
right.
But an idealized image is different. It's like a grandiose, unrealistic version of ourselves that we create to compensate for feelings of inadequacy
Got it.
and insecurity.
So it's less about genuine self-love
Yes.
and more about kind of constructing this
It is.
perfect facade
Yeah.
to protect ourselves.
Yeah. And while it might seem impressive on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
it's incredibly fragile.
Yeah.
And it prevents us from really embracing our true selves.
So that in itself can create a lot of internal conflict.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so we've got the idealized image. What are some of the other defense mechanisms?
Well, another common one is what she called externalization.
Okay.
And this is basically projecting our inner conflicts outward,
Mm-hmm.
blaming others for our problems,
Okay.
feeling like we're at the mercy of external circumstances.
So it's a way of avoiding responsibility. Exactly.
For our own lives.
It is.
Instead of saying, hey, this is on me.
Right.
This is on everyone else.
Yeah, it's the world's fault.
It's the world.
It's not me.
Right.
Yeah, and that can be tempting.
Right.
You know, it protects us from those uncomfortable feelings of guilt and shame,
Right.
but it also keeps us stuck.
Right.
It keeps us from really addressing the root of our struggles.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've got this idealized image. We've got this externalization.
Yes.
And it sounds like these defense mechanisms,
Yeah.
while they might offer some temporary relief,
Right.
they can actually make things worse in the long run.
Yeah, they can keep us trapped
Mm-hmm.
in this cycle of conflict and unhappiness.
Are there any other protective structures?
Yes. There are a couple more
Okay.
that are worth discussing. One is what she called blind spots
Okay.
and compartmentalization.
Okay, so what does she mean by that? Well, these involve literally blinding ourselves to the contradictions in our own behavior.
Okay.
We divide our lives into these separate spheres, each with its own set of rules.
Right.
So we don't have to confront the full scope
Right.
of our inner conflict.
So we're kind of building these walls
Yeah, in a way.
within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
To keep these conflicting parts
Right.
from colliding.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. So think about someone who's incredibly generous
Okay.
and charitable in their public life,
Mm-hmm.
but then they treat their family with coldness and neglect.
Okay.
They might not even recognize the disconnect
Right.
between
Yeah.
these two aspects of themselves.
Wow.
Or consider someone who holds strong moral convictions,
Okay.
yet engages in behaviors that directly contradict those beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
You see, they compartmentalize their lives
Right.
to avoid facing that cognitive dissonance.
That's a really powerful image,
Yeah.
these separate compartments. It's like a way of preserving a sense of self,
It is?
even if that self is fragmented
Right.
and ultimately not really sustainable.
It's a great observation. And you're right, the cost of maintaining these blind spots can be significant.
How so?
We lose touch with our integrity, our ability to really live
Right.
in accordance with our values.
Okay.
And it erodes our capacity for genuine connection
Mm-hmm.
with others.
Okay, so we've talked about the idealized image.
Right.
We've talked about externalization, and now this idea of blind spots
Yeah,
and compartmentalization.
Mm-hmm.
Are there other major defenses?
Yes. The final one we'll discuss is what she called arbitrary rightness.
Okay, arbitrary rightness. What is that?
This is when we cling rigidly
Okay.
to our opinions and beliefs
Mm-hmm.
as a way to avoid doubt.
Got it.
and inner conflict.
So if I'm always right,
Right.
I never have to question anything.
Exactly. You never have to question your beliefs, your actions,
Right.
and it creates a false sense of certainty
Mm,
and control
makes sense.
in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
But the cost of that is we become closed off
Yes.
to new ideas, to
Um.
new experiences,
Mhm.
to growth and change.
Exactly.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All of this is, kind of painting a pretty
Mm-hmm.
sobering picture.
It can be.
It seems like all of these attempts to protect ourselves, to
Yeah.
manage our anxieties, can actually lead to more suffering
They often do.
in the long run.
Yes.
What did Horney have to say about the consequences?
Well, she believed that one of the most profound consequences of these unresolved conflicts
Mm-hmm.
is this pervasive sense of hopelessness.
So it's not just about specific anxieties.
Yeah.
It's more of a general feeling that things can't get better.
Yeah, a feeling of being trapped, unable to break free.
So it's like resignation.
There's a deep resignation, a feeling of being stuck, unable to change even if you want to.
That's a heavy thing to carry.
It is.
Does she offer any way out?
Well, what's remarkable about Horney is that she was deeply optimistic
Okay.
about the possibility of change.
Okay.
Unlike Freud, who saw these conflicts as arising from these deep ingrained instincts that were nearly impossible to alter.
Right.
Horney believed they were rooted in disturbed human relationships,
Okay.
especially those we experience early in life.
So if these patterns are learned,
Exactly.
they can also be unlearned.
That's the idea.
So there's hope.
There is.
Even though these conflicts run deep,
Yes.
there's still a potential for transformation.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the therapeutic process comes in.
Okay.
She saw therapy as a process of uncovering those patterns, those defenses,
Right.
and gradually dismantling them.
Brick by brick.
Brick by brick, exactly. It's not about becoming a different person.
Right.
It's about reclaiming those parts of ourselves that have been buried under those layers of neurosis.
You mentioned earlier that her work was very different from Freud's. Yes.
Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. One of the most significant differences
Okay.
is that Horney rejected Freud's emphasis on biological instincts
Okay.
as the primary drivers of behavior.
So for her, it was more about the social environment?
It was. She emphasized the role of culture and social environment.
So how we're nurtured.
Exactly.
How we're brought up.
It's about how those drives are molded by the world around us.
By the world.
Yeah, especially those early relationships.
Those early relationships.
Yeah.
Okay.
She argued that neurosis wasn't just an individual problem, but a reflection of a society
Okay.
that fosters competition,
Right.
insecurity, and alienation.
So it's both nature and nurture.
It is. It's this interplay between our inner world and the outer world.
Really interesting.
Yeah, and this perspective really broadened the scope of psychoanalysis,
Okay.
moving it beyond just the individual psyche to consider those social and cultural forces. That makes sense.
That contribute to our well-being.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems to suggest that healing and growth aren't just about individual therapy,
No.
but about creating a more supportive,
Yes.
a more humane society.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
She believed that true healing, both individually and collectively, requires a shift in our values, a move towards a culture that prioritizes empathy,
Okay.
connection, a sense of belonging.
That's a tall order,
It is.
but I think we can all agree that that would be a good thing.
Absolutely.
So we've been talking about, these different ways that people try to cope
Yes.
with these anxieties and these conflicts. But you mentioned earlier that Horney also explored what she called sadistic trends.
Yes.
Can you help us understand that?
Sure.
What does she mean by that?
It is a complex
Okay.
and challenging aspect of her theory.
Okay.
For Horney, sadism wasn't just about overt cruelty
Okay.
or deriving pleasure
Right.
from others' pain.
Right.
It was a much more nuanced concept,
Okay.
a way of coping with that profound sense of hopelessness and self-contempt that we were discussing earlier.
So it's not necessarily about being intentionally malicious.
Right.
It's more about this deeper,
It is.
unconscious drive that emerges from these feelings of despair
That's a good way to put it.
and worthlessness.
It's a kind of vicarious living,
Okay.
a way of seeking a sense of power and control through dominating and devaluing others.
When your own life feels empty
Exactly.
and meaningless.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of how this might show up?
Sure, imagine someone who constantly belittles
Okay.
and criticizes others, seems to take pleasure in pointing out their flaws.
Okay.
Or someone who needs to be the center of attention,
Okay.
manipulates and exploits others to feel important.
It's almost like a defense against their own
It is.
feelings of inadequacy.
Exactly. If they can make others feel smaller,
Right.
then maybe they can feel bigger.
At least for a moment.
At least for a moment.
Yeah.
That's a great point. And what's important to remember is that people who exhibit these sadistic tendencies are often unaware
Okay.
of the deeper motivation.
They don't realize
They are driving them.
Yeah, they might rationalize their actions, justify their cruelty as tough love.
Right.
They might even see themselves as the victim.
Wow.
So there's a level of unconsciousness at play,
It sounds like it.
a disconnect between their intentions and the impact of their behavior.
So this makes it really hard to address
It does.
because there's a lack of self-awareness.
Yes. A resistance to acknowledging the harm that they're causing.
This all speaks to just the incredible complexity
It does.
of the human psyche.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
We're driven by these deep-seated needs for love and connection.
Right.
Yet we also have this capacity
Yeah.
for immense cruelty and self-deception.
This is the paradox
It is
of human nature. It is the paradox of human nature.
And I think Horney's work does a really beautiful job
I agree.
of illuminating that.
It does.
You know, that tension that exists within us.
Yeah.
You mentioned this idea of a search for glory
Yes.
that often accompanies these sadistic trends. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The search for glory, as Horney described it, is this drive to feel special,
Okay.
to be recognized as exceptional, even if it's based on a distorted reality.
Okay.
It often involves constructing that idealized image of oneself
Right.
and then striving relentlessly to live up to it.
Even if it means sacrificing
Yes.
authenticity and connection.
Exactly.
Oh, it.
And when reality inevitably fails
Right.
to live up to those inflated expectations,
Yeah.
it can lead to profound disappointment, self-hatred,
Right.
a desperate need to find some other way to feel valuable.
And that's where the sadistic tendencies can come in
That's where they can come in.
as a way to compensate
Exactly. To compensate for that perceived lack of glory.
by seeking it through other means.
Yes, even if those means are destructive
Right.
and ultimately self-defeating.
And it can be a really difficult cycle
It can.
to break
It can be very difficult to break free.
because it's rooted in those feelings
It is.
of inadequacy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got all of these different concepts,
Mm-hmm.
the basic conflicts, the protective structures,
Yes.
the search for glory,
The search for glory.
the sadistic trends.
Yeah.
And they all kind of weave together to create this really rich
They do.
and nuanced understanding of the human experience.
That's what makes her work so compelling.
It is.
It's not just about diagnosing problems. It's about offering a path
Okay.
towards healing and wholeness.
So we've explored the kind of darker
Yeah.
side of things,
The shadow side.
the shadow side,
Yeah.
in the next part.
Okay.
Let's talk about that path toward healing.
I'd love to.
What did Horney have to say about how we can break free from these patterns
Yes.
and move towards a more fulfilling life?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've spent some time, you know, unpacking these kind of neurotic patterns.
Yeah.
And it's clear that they can have some, you know,
Right.
pretty challenging consequences in our lives.
Definitely.
But I'm curious, what did Horney suggest as a path
Yeah.
toward, you know, healing and growth?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it's going to take more than just willpower
Well, it does.
to shift these ingrained patterns.
You're absolutely right. It's not about just deciding to be different. It's about a much deeper process
Yeah.
of self-discovery and
Well,
transformation.
Okay, so what does that look like?
Well, one of the first steps, according to Horney,
Okay.
is recognizing and dismantling those protective structures.
So taking off that armor.
Taking off the armor.
Exactly.
Even though it could feel really scary,
It can be very scary.
to expose those vulnerable parts of ourselves.
It's not an easy process.
Yeah. But it takes courage to face those shadows.
Right.
To acknowledge the ways we've been limiting ourselves.
Yeah.
The ways we've been hurting ourselves and others.
So it's about vulnerability.
It is about vulnerability.
It's about honesty.
It's about being willing to confront those uncomfortable truths.
And that's where real transformation
That's where it begins. Yes.
So I imagine therapy can play a really important role
It can.
in this process.
Yeah, it can be incredibly helpful
Yeah, to have someone to guide you
to have a trained professional
through that.
who can provide a safe and supportive space to explore those patterns,
to challenge those defenses.
And offer new perspectives.
So important.
But Horney also emphasized the importance of self-analysis.
So it's not just about going to an expert to fix you.
Right.
It's about really cultivating.
It's about understanding yourself.
Yeah, it's self-awareness.
Learning to recognize your own patterns, your own defenses.
So it's an ongoing process.
It is.
Of self-reflection.
It's about becoming your own inner observer.
I like that.
Yeah, that compassionate witness who can notice when you're falling back.
When those defenses are kicking in.
Into old habits.
Yeah.
When the defenses are kicking in.
Yeah.
And it's through that ongoing self-reflection that you can start to make different choices.
So it's like we're building a new relationship.
It is.
With ourselves.
It's a new relationship with yourself.
One based on curiosity and compassion.
Exactly.
A willingness to really see ourselves for who we are.
That's beautiful. And, you know, that's ultimately what Horney was pointing towards, this journey of reclaiming our real selves.
But what did you mean by the real self?
Yeah. Well, for Horney, the real self is that essential part of us.
Okay.
That's whole. That's capable of genuine love.
Okay.
Creativity and joy.
So it's like that core part of us.
It is that core part.
Like it's buried under
all those layers of neurosis.
Of all those defenses. So it's about kind of peeling back those layers.
Peeling back the layers.
And rediscovering who we really are.
Yes. And it's a gradual process. A journey of uncovering and rediscovering.
And through that process, we can start to live more authentically.
More spontaneously. More in alignment with our values.
With our true desires.
And our true desires.
All of this feels really hopeful.
It is hopeful.
It suggests that even though these patterns run deep,
they do.
We're not doomed
No, we're not.
to repeat them. That was the core of her message. She believed deeply in our capacity for growth and change.
But she also recognized it's not a solitary journey.
No, it's not.
Right.
Yeah.
And we talked earlier about the role of culture.
Yes.
In shaping these patterns. And I think that feels especially relevant today.
It does.
With so much pressure to achieve... To conform.
To present a certain image to the world.
Right. It's like we're constantly bombarded.
We are.
With messages about who we should be.
And how we should look.
What we should buy.
What we should buy.
Yeah. And all of that can contribute to feelings of anxiety and inadequacy.
For sure.
And Horney argued that true healing, both individually and collectively, requires a shift in our values.
So it's not just about individual therapy.
No.
It's about creating a more supportive society.
Exactly. A society that prioritizes cooperation over competition.
Right.
Authenticity over image. Connection over isolation.
It's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
But I think, you know, we can all agree.
Absolutely.
That that's something worth striving for.
It is something worth striving for.
Wow. This deep dive has been quite a journey.
It has been a journey.
You know, Horney's ideas, they're so insightful.
They are.
And honestly, a bit unsettling.
They can be.
At times.
But they're also incredibly liberating.
How so?
Well, because when we start to understand these patterns, we can begin to break free from them.
Right. We're not at the mercy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We can make choices.
We have a choice.
That align with our true selves.
Right.
With the things that bring us joy and connection and purpose.
Yeah, she's giving us a map.
She is.
To navigate those treacherous inner landscapes.
Treacherous inner landscapes.
Yeah.
And find our way back to wholeness.
To wholeness and authenticity.
And authenticity. And that's a pretty incredible gift.
It is a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
The more we explore these ideas, the more self-aware we become.
Right.
The more we cultivate those qualities of compassion, resilience, self-acceptance.
All essential.
Essential for living a fulfilling life.
So to all of our listeners out there.
Yes.
If you're feeling stuck. If you're struggling.
If you're wrestling with those inner conflicts.
Yeah.
If you're yearning for wholeness.
I highly recommend.
Explore Horney's work.
Exploring Horney's work.
You might be surprised at what you uncover. Within yourself.
And remember this journey toward healing and self-discovery.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
It is. It's not about reaching some perfect state.
Right.
It's about embracing the process.
The ups and downs.
The ups and downs, the insights and the struggles.
And who knows? You might find some hope.
You might.
Some inspiration.
Yeah.
In the midst of all that.
It's in those struggles.
Yeah.
Those moments of vulnerability
Right.
that we often find our greatest strength.
Our deepest wisdom.
Our deepest wisdom.
This has been another incredible deep dive
It has.
into the world of Karen Horney.
I've enjoyed it.
Until next time, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
And keep learning.